It has been over 9 years since Sargon of Akkad uploaded the first This Week in Stupid video, one of the starting points of the current culture wars. It marked the moment when liberals woke up to the realization that there are new forces rising on the left, using the internet to push very simplistic answers to complicated social and political problems, and promoting extreme, anti-liberal, anti-democratic policies based on those answers. In the decade that passed, things have, in some respects, gone much stupider. These anti-liberal answers and policies have gone mainstream, polarizing the political debate and aiding the rise of similarly extremist forces on the right. It has been this decade in stupid. Online, back then, we tried to offer an alternative, a movement of liberal leftists fighting against these forces. We formed a coalition with right-wing forces to defend liberal democracy. When it turned out that some of those right-wingers were anti-liberal themselves, we used the same liberal values to criticize them. At least, some of us did. Many others drifted either to the left or to the right because they identified the other side as the true danger to democracy. In that, they also gave a pass to the anti-liberals in their own camp, believing that they are not a major problem. And some, unfortunately, even adopted anti-liberal ideas themselves to fight against the menace of the other side. At the heart of it was a belief that liberalism has failed, that liberal values are too weak to withstand those attacks from the left and the right. I don't see it that way, and I believe this disillusionment with liberalism is merely due to lack of patience, lack of understanding that liberal forces take time to work and defeat their enemy. From my perspective, then, all these dropouts only added to the stupid. But in another respect, things have gone smarter. Because for those of us who maintained their critical position, the online wars provided a glimpse into these anti-liberal ideas that have been festering in the dark for decades, and we understand them much better now than we did back then. While the big anti-woke channels have all picked political sides, there is a small group of culture warriors on relatively small channels that are still obeying the original impulse that made us all speak up. They are usually called centrists, and I don't like this label, because it suggests that it is a small group in the ideological middle between the left and the right, when actually, centrist is just a name for those of us who are fighting for liberal democracy, against the small yet vocal margins who are threatening it. I would rather be arguing against the conservative on solutions that actually make sense, but instead I find myself lumped with them, under the label centrists. For the sake of this video, however, I shall adopt this label, because I want to align myself with this group of YouTubers, and use my critical skills to help it grow. A channel that has recently become kind of centrist central, and which I consider to be one of the best of the bunch, is the Sitch and Adam Show, with their twice-a-week podcast. They still call out the bullshit of both the left and the right, and they have come closer than anyone I know to understanding the ideology that underlies the woke left. Anyone but me, that is. And this is why I want to call them out today, because there is one issue on which, while not dropping the ball, I feel that they mishandle the ball. When it comes to the fight between J.K. Rowling and the transgender activists, they fail to recognize and call out Rowling's extremist positions. Why does it matter? Oh, it matters a lot, as I will go ahead and show. And I will also suggest what a centrist position on this issue should be, and argue that this solution, which defeats both woke feminists like Rowling and the woke trans activists, will go a long way in dismantling wokeness as a whole. J.K. Rowling, the beloved author of the Harry Potter books, is also a radical feminist, albeit more compassionate than your regular radfem. This made her a darling of the woke left, until the big breakup between the feminists and the trans activists, which forced her to pick sides. In 2019, she came out on the feminist side, and since then she has become the face of their battle. This, obviously, makes her a target of vicious online attacks and cancellation attempts. Earlier this year, she appeared on a podcast titled The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling to talk about her ordeals. The podcast is 7 hours long, divided into 7 chapters, and it goes into Rowling's autobiography, into her battle with the trans activists, and into the culture wars in general. You can listen to it online. Link below. Shortly after, ContraPoints uploaded a response video, under the same title, with the description just saying why I left the center. Her video, I have to say, is a disgrace. She constantly misrepresents Rowling's positions, she shows no capacity for self-criticism, and she tries to argue that the use of violence to achieve your political goals is legitimate. It is sad to see such a talented and important YouTuber go down this path. Sitch and Adam then did a 10-hour podcast titled Turf War, in which they react to this video, and did a very good job in tearing apart all of Contra's points. When it came to criticizing Rowling's views, however, I felt that they didn't do such a good job.
It's so funny because before all this trans stuff blew up, I mean, J.K. Rowling was like hyper woke. She's a hyper woke, radical feminist, essentially. And now it's like, oh, she's a TERF.
Yeah, no.
What do you mean was? She still is hyper woke, and her views on the trans issue come straight out of her wokeness. She hasn't changed a bit. Okay, Sitch and Adam do understand this, and they say it elsewhere in their video. I think what they mean to say here is that she is no longer perceived as woke, even though she is. However, I fear that despite realizing what she stands for, the fact that they basically agree with her on the dangers of woke trans is causing Adam and Sitch to sympathize with her, and because of it, they fail to recognize how extremist the position is, and end up pretty much endorsing it. The woke trans ideology is harmful, and it should be criticized and rejected, but we should beware not to do it in a way that will bring back the woke feminism of Rowling and her ilk, which is even more harmful. The role of the so-called centrists should be to criticize and expose both sides. Sitch and Adam, as we shall see, have a keen understanding of the ideologies and causes that underlie this lamentable situation, showing how much we've advanced in our understanding of wokeness. And yet, I fear that they are not quite there, that they are missing the mark by a few inches. More than a few, actually. I want to help them, and the entire centrist bloc, get better, and this is one reason I am making this video. There is another reason. We all knew that if trans activism continues down the same path, it will spark a right-wing backlash. I try to offer solutions to the philosophical problems the transgender issue presents, hoping we can avert this backlash. But no one listens to me, and now the backlash is upon us, and I fear it is going to be with us for a while, and bring misery to many transgenders. The only way to defeat it is to offer practical solutions to the problems, and this is what I shall, once again, do here, through criticizing the positions of J.K. Rowling and ContraPoints. What I am going to do, then, is start by discussing the witch trials of J.K. Rowling, without much criticism. Then I'll offer my own criticism of Contra's reaction to it. And finally, I'll respond to Sitch and Adam, and show where they don't quite get it, and where they go too soft on Rowling. Out of all that, I shall offer my alternative.
I wanted to take a minute to tell you about our sponsor, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We live in a moment when free speech, the bedrock of our democracy and of all free societies, is often viewed as suspect, where many argue that the right to free speech is too dangerous, and that even listening to ideological opponents is morally wrong. Many people just don't see a problem with using the law, corporate power, and even extraordinary social pressure to censor viewpoints they disagree with. But many of us feel the costs of all this in our everyday lives. We feel it when we self-censor, afraid to say what we really think, sometimes even in private conversations with friends or loved ones. We feel it when we opt out of a growing number of public discussions, afraid of the potential cost to our jobs and even our relationships. Fire shares a mission with this show.
This was the voice of Megan Phelps Roper, of the notorious Phelps family that heads the Westboro Baptist Church. The church was known for its vehement objection to the acceptance of gays in society, and the despicable tactics it used to make its point. Megan was always involved in their activities, until arguing with people on Twitter gradually made her doubt her beliefs, and eventually caused her to repent and leave the church. She felt that it was the persistence of the people on Twitter, their honest attempt to argue with her in good faith, that saved her. This left her with empathy to those who hold bigoted views, a belief that they can be reached and shown the error of their ways, if you do it with kindness and belief in their inner goodness. She is therefore a fierce critic of today's cancel culture, and has a podcast on which she encourages conversation and public debate. She convinced J.K. Rowling to come on as a guest, leading to a 7-hour document, very well made and interesting. It starts with talking about Rowling's personal story and how she became an author, then deals with the first time she suffered a witch hunt, when the religious right came after her for allegedly poisoning the minds of their children with witchcraft, and then moves on to how she got involved in the current culture wars.
But I was seeing this happen across the board to artists, and there was a kind of Puritanism that was rising that to me seemed very illiberal, so very contrary, I suppose, to my values, to my core values. I was starting to think about this a lot. Subcultures that have their own rigid rules, acceptable beliefs, non-acceptable beliefs, everything becoming very reductive. I was also deeply concerned by it because to me it was a rise of the kind of authoritarianism and lack of empathy that it's in all of my books. It's in literally every book I write. Mm-hmm. If there's one thing that I stand against more than any other, it is authoritarianism. And that cuts across political persuasions, cuts through atheists all the way through to various different religions. So I was definitely seeing that. And I was becoming really concerned.
This is where Rowling gets you. She claims to be speaking in the name of liberal values, to be against bullies and oppressors. Here she sounds like one of them centrists. And, like we did, she talks about how she didn't like cancel culture, when it started out as an attack on right-wing figures.
I think the first time I became really interested in what was going on, sort of culturally.
I've taken some time out of my busy schedule, being fabulous and doing my hair, to prepare a speech for you. Well, a few remarks, really.
It was Milo Yiannopoulos.
Feminism is cancer. Thank you very much.
The alt-right provocateur, I suppose you would call him. And I'm watching from across the pond as he tries to speak on various campuses, and there are protests, riots. We want him deplatformed. We don't want him to speak at all.
They're using free speech as a justification to have these fascists come to Berkeley.
And I thought it was a terrible strategic error.
Rowling says that she was alarmed watching people who she saw as being on her side of the political aisle, behaving in a way that she felt broke with her deeply held principles, even when the target was someone who she agreed was offensive and immoral and a political opponent. And she started to think that maybe this was something she needed to speak up about.
But she didn't speak up back then, back when we stood up against it. Then, however, woke cancel culture turned inwards, and the thing that feminists were doing to everyone back in the first half of the 2010s was now, in the second half, done to them by the trans activists.
But then, she started to see that it wasn't just her political opponents who were being treated this way.
I was starting to see activists behaving in a very aggressive way outside feminist meetings.
The thing that alarmed her the most, she says, was that those trans activists refused to have any debate about the social and philosophical problems that arise from their stance.
And then we come to the famous two-word slogan, the stock phrase, no debate, no debate, no debate. We hear it all the time. That alarms me, really alarms me. I can't think of a purer instance of authoritarianism than no debate. In fact, That is the attitude of the fundamentalist. You may not challenge my ideas. That makes you evil. I am righteous. I don't have to explain my righteousness. And I am entitled, therefore, to bully you, to harass you, to silence you, to take away your livelihood, all the way up to attacking you.
Are you still talking about trans activists? Or are you describing your own feelings as a radical feminist? Just kidding, JK. I'm sure you don't think like that. But where were you when feminists were busting up MRA meetings and refusing to have any debate? Where were you when they were branding any criticism of their ideas and methods as misogyny and cancelling those who dared? Never mind. Phelps then goes and interviews some other figures who explored the issue, or were affected by it, and one amusing thing is how outdated it sounds. They sound like we did back in 2015. There's a lot of talk about Tumblr, and how it is the woke hub that creates cancel culture.
And things that we wouldn't have recognized as being offensive suddenly were considered offensive. There's a real culture of calling not only people, but media properties and the creators of those media properties problematic on Tumblr.
And so that's really where you get cancel culture in a sense, which takes sensitivity and the strengthening of taboos to such a point that anyone who transgresses them should be just totally removed from the conversation.
Yeah, this is what we thought back in the day. Those of us who looked deeper into it have learned since then that the Academy is the real culprit here, and the Tumblrinas are just victims of the garbage generated by certain academic disciplines. Rowling also says this.
It's just that I'm having these conversations and the climate of fear was scaring me more than speaking out. You know, what are we letting happen here? This is insane that there's this much fear around a woman arguing that she has the right to describe her life and her body in any way she chooses. This is insanely regressive.
Oh? Are you saying that they are the regressive left? Anyway, Rowling says that this climate of fear is what prompted her to stand up, knowing that she's too big to be cancelled. And, on surface level, she sounds very reasonable.
My feeling is, and it's a feeling that was strongly expressed in the Potter books, that as many diverse life experiences as possible should be explored and expressed. And having felt like an outsider in several different ways in my life, I have a real feeling for the underdog. And I have a real feeling for people who feel they don't fit. And I see that hugely, particularly among younger trans people. I can understand that feeling only too well.
But seeing this recent surge in numbers seemed like something worth questioning soberly.
Gender dysphoria exists. It causes massive distress. I know it's real. And I know there will be, I believe, a minority of people for whom this will be a solution. But in the numbers we're currently seeing, particularly of young people coming forward, I find cause for doubt and cause for concern. So I did what I always tend to do when in that situation. So I read a ton of books. That is my instinct. If I'm interested in...
Rowling said that she went out and bought some of the big best-selling memoirs by trans authors.
Out of this gender identity movement. So Jacob Tobias, Sissy, Andrea Long Chu, brilliant writer, females, Gender Games, The Trouble with Men.
She read essays.
Is Gender Fluid, Dr. Sally
And
Ride.
academic literature from influential thinkers like Judith Butler.
And I'm reading countless blogs and articles.
You're trying to have your views challenged.
Completely, because I really want to understand what is the thinking through personal experience, but also the philosophy, the ideology. I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, am I missing something?
Here she comes off as liberal, Judith Butler notwithstanding. So what is the problem with her views? We'll get into that later, after we figure out, along with Adam and Sitch, what wokeness is. Before we leave the podcast, there are just two more moments I want to highlight. ContraPoints is also interviewed by Phelps, one of the only two transgender persons who agreed to be part of the podcast and present their side. And she says this about the fear, which Rowling is one of the main proponents of, that kids are being rushed into gender transitioning without proper consideration.
Look, no one wants to rush teenagers into transitioning if that's not what's going to be the best outcome for them, right? I just feel that a lot of the kind of moral panic over this is overstated.
No one, Natalie? Are you sure? I'll explain later why I have my doubts. The second moment I want to highlight comes right before the end, when Rowling turns the tables and presents a question to Phelps.
One thing that you said to me earlier in our discussion really stuck with me. You said to me that not long before you left, you said to someone, an interviewer, I'm all in. And you told me I believed that I had questioned myself and I was fine with everything. But you said you hadn't gone deep enough, trust and obey, right? Mm-hmm. You'd never actually taken apart the most fundamental three words of your belief system. You'd never challenged those. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that? Because that really interests me.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of lawyers, right? So my mom is one of 13, and I think 11 of the 13 went to law school. They were very, very smart, very analytical, like very logical people, which I think surprised a lot of people to learn, because it's easy to assume that these are just, kind of rednecks with backwards beliefs or something.
Megan says that, contrary to popular belief, the Westboro Baptist Church actually does have a culture of self-criticism, and she was constantly asking herself if she was right, as she was spreading all the gay hate. However,
but I realized before I left that there were two fundamental premises of our ideology that I never questioned. I never truly questioned the idea that the Bible was the literal, infallible Word of God, and that Westboro's understanding of it was the right one, because, again, it was all laid out there for me. And as many questions as I asked, from those two premises, essentially everything else basically fell into place.
Rowling is sitting there nodding, but she never seems to be asking herself if she is guilty of the same thing. It seems to me that she actually does believe that she is a liberal, and fighting against bullies and oppressors, not realizing that her belief system is based on some deeply illiberal ideas that have no scientific basis, and are taken on blind faith. And these ideas are controlling her actions, leading her to be the oppressor. ContraPoints, and others, claim that Rowling is faking it, that her compassionate and reasonable rhetoric is merely a mask for bigotry. I don't think so. I think that she is honest, but simply fails to think critically about her most fundamental beliefs. Before I show that, however, let's see what the other side has to say.
That's it. I'm going full Slytherin. This podcast has pushed me over the edge. Centrism has gone too far, and I am now pro-cancel culture.
You all know Natalie Wynn, aka ContraPoints, one of the most famous trans women in the world, a champion of the woke, and the woman who put the bread in BreadTube. The podcast brought her out of her cryogenic freeze, prompting her to post a new video after a year of silence. She's back, she's angrier than ever, and she's more unreasonable than ever. Let's hear what Ms. Points has to say.
Alright kids, it's Transin time. Last year, I agreed to be a guest on a podcast about J.K. Rowling, hosted by Megan Phelps Roper, an escapee from the Westboro Baptist Church. Megan contacted me for her podcast because I had criticized J.K. Rowling in a video a couple years ago. Now you might be wondering, why would I think that a person who's been carrying a God hates sign most of her life would be the correct person to lead an international conversation about the intricacies of LGBT issues?
Because I'm an idiot. Happy?
Basically, I agreed to the podcast because it's a pretty irresistible pitch. A former member of the Westboro Baptist Church wants to mediate a conversation between me and the author of Harry Potter. Would you say no to that? Maybe. If you're smart. Last month, the podcast was announced, in an essay by Megan titled The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. Obviously a tendentious framing that posits Jo Rowe as the target of an irrational trans witch hunt. The essay included a teaser quote from Rowling complaining that she's been profoundly misunderstood, as well as a photo of an angry trans mob holding a "Rotten Hell Rowling" sign, juxtaposed with an image of conservative Christians burning Harry Potter books in the early 2000s. This did not bode well. So I disavowed the podcast on Twitter because I didn't want my name lending legitimacy to some kind of unearned J.K. Rowling redemption tour.
Actually, I thought Natalie did a pretty good job at presenting her side, to an audience that is probably mostly leaning towards Rowling. But as you keep watching, you realize that her disavowal of the podcast is part of her disavowal of dialogue altogether. Before we get to that, let's see what her case against Rowling is.
In episode 5 of The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, Jo Rowe compares trans activists to Death Eaters, the fictionalized fascists in Harry Potter.
My position is that this activist movement, in the form that it's currently taking, echoes the very thing that I was warning against in Harry Potter. The Death Eaters claimed we have been made to live in secret, and now is our time. I am fighting what I see as a powerful, insidious, misogynistic movement.
Long-time viewers of this channel will remember that years ago, I made a distinction between most trans people, who simply want us to accept that they are not cis, and between a certain section of trans activists, which I called the neo-Nazis. And the reason I call them neo-Nazis is that they are indeed like Rowling portrays them. I've moved away from this term, because I don't want to add to the anti-trans backlash, but we should note that when Rowling compares them to Death Eaters, she is not talking about all transgendered people, but about what I call the neo-Nazis. ContraPoints, however, sarcastically disagrees.
Yeah, I don't hate marginalized people, I just hate it when they advocate for themselves.
Okay, let's make this clear right off the bat. Woke activists do not advocate for the people they claim to speak for. What they do, as we shall later discuss in detail, is capitalize on the plight of these people, and use it to promote an ideology designed to undermine liberal society, hoping to bring about a revolution. So don't fall for Natalie's indignation. Anyway, this serves her to move into this argument.
J.K. Rowling's bigotry is exhausting to argue with, because she expresses it as an endless series of what are called Motte and Bailey arguments. A Motte and Bailey argument is named after a type of castle consisting of a motte, that is, a tower atop a mound or hill, easy to defend, and a bailey, a fenced courtyard that's much more vulnerable to attack, difficult to defend. So a Motte and Bailey argument is when someone makes a provocative claim that's difficult to defend, the bailey. And then, when confronted with counter-arguments, they walk it back to a much less controversial and easy-to-defend version of the claim, the motte. For example, Rowling will make an ambiguous claim like sex is real. What does she mean by that? What are the implications? Well, in the podcast, she explains that she thinks it's very sinister that in the Associated Press style guide, it says that instead of referring to a trans woman as a man who identifies as a woman, journalists should simply say a trans woman is a woman.
That, from the Associated Press, is hugely powerful. They've edged from identifies as a woman, so a man identifies as a woman, and I think we all understand what that means, into is a woman. And that's precisely the creep that I'm talking about. We are using language to make accurate definition of sex difference unspeakable.
Which is, of course, false, because the words trans and cis exist precisely to make it easy to talk about sex difference. Thanks a lot, Tumblr. This is controversial, right? Calling trans women men who identify as women, calling trans men women. This is the Bailey in her Motte and Bailey argument. Trans women are men, trans men are women. That's the controversial interpretation of sex is real. Now, when accused of transphobia and facing backlash, Rowling walks the argument back and says, I'm being persecuted just for saying that women should be allowed to discuss how being female has shaped our lives. Women should be allowed to discuss how being female has shaped our lives. This is the obvious and utterly uncontroversial interpretation of sex is real. The Mott.
I don't entirely agree with Natalie's reasoning here, but essentially, she is right. Because of her feminist ideology, Rowling believes that in order to say that sex is real, we must deny that gender is real. And if gender isn't real, it means that transgenders aren't real either. Yet she knows it's a controversial stance, so she never says it outright, but uses slippery tongue and Motte and Bailey arguments to conceal it. The problem I have with ContraPoints is that she is seemingly oblivious to the fact that her side does the same thing. The woke trans activists believe that to say that gender is real, we must deny that sex is real, and they use the same techniques to put forth this argument, which sounds insane if you just say it outright. In fact, Natalie herself uses the Motte and Bailey argument several times during the video.
Rowling objects to the slogan, no debate, in the strongest possible terms.
And then we come to the famous two-word slogan, the stock phrase, no debate, no debate, no debate. We hear it all the time. That alarms me, really alarms me. I can't think of a purer instance of authoritarianism than no debate.
It's kind of amazing to me that someone could think angry trans people on Twitter are the purest example of authoritarianism.
ContraPoints, as her video makes abundantly clear, also holds the no debate stance. Yet she knows that this is a Bailey, because most people agree with Rowling that this is the quintessence of authoritarianism. So she misrepresents what Rowling said, and claims that she meant that angry trans people are the purest example of authoritarianism. This provides her with a motte that is very easy to defend. In another place, she does what many leftists do, which is to downplay the evils of cancel culture by pretending it means something else than what its critics mean. Thus, again, she creates a motte by misrepresenting the description of the Bailey.
And I don't entirely disagree with Megan about this. She's totally right that if you want to change people's minds, then approaching them with compassion and empathy is usually the best way to do that. But Megan reaches another conclusion that I don't agree with, which is that because compassion and civil conversation are most likely to persuade people, we should never cancel anyone, even the most horrible bigots. And canceling is a pretty meaningless term at this point, but what Megan means is we shouldn't say mean things to bigots. We shouldn't boycott or counter-protest or raise our voices. We shouldn't shun or exclude anyone, because that's just not how you change minds.
Really, Natalie? This is what Phelps means when she talks about canceling? No, Megan's podcast actually does a darn good job at portraying the McCarthyist terrors of cancel culture.
Gillian Phillip, a children's book author, added the hashtag #IStandWithJK to her Twitter bio, igniting a wave of rape threats, death threats, and a campaign for her to be dropped by her publisher. And just 24 hours later, she received a call from HarperCollins and was fired on the spot. Unlike Rowling, she still needed income, and now works as a truck driver. Rosa Friedman, a human rights lawyer and professor, came out publicly against self-ID laws and received death and rape threats, along with calls for her to be fired, and even urine poured on her office door. Joe Phoenix, a criminology researcher who works with women prisoners, spoke publicly in support of female-only prisons, and was pushed out of her position at Open University after a petition was passed around calling her fundamentally hostile to the rights of trans people. Jenny Lindsay, a prominent Scottish poet who only spoke up to oppose calls for violence directed at so-called TERFs, she became the object of such intense threats that the police counseled her to avoid public events for her own safety. And Kathleen Stock, the philosophy professor whose essay "This Is Not a Drill" was shared by Rowling, who was advocating for academic freedom to debate these questions, even if her side turned out to be wrong, she became the object of fierce campus protests.
But let's go back to talking about where Contra is right. Sitch and Adam claim that she uses guilt by association to smear Rowling, showing her interacting with anti-trans ideologues and then using their hateful words to characterize her, even though she never uses such language. But I agree with Natalie here. If you associate with bigots, you have to make clear where your views differ from theirs, if you don't want us to perceive you as one of them. But Rowling never does. And she never does because while she may disagree with their rhetoric, she agrees with their ideology. Another contrapoint is that Rowling uses her Twitter, or should I say the site formerly known as Twitter, mainly to tweet negative stuff about transgendered people, without ever tweeting anything positive. And Natalie is completely right. This is the mark of a bigot. So I think she does have a case when she declares,
So that's it, right? It's over. Case closed. I'm not going to argue anymore about whether J.K. Rowling is transphobic, because anyone who believes in transphobia can see that obviously she is.
But then she goes on to say,
The question now is whether transphobia is the sort of thing that progressives can denounce, the way we at least aspire to denounce racism, misogyny, and homophobia. Is transphobia a legitimate viewpoint worthy of polite consideration and respect in liberal, humane society? Or is it just an ugly prejudice that we can justifiably react to with scorn and condemnation? And there's an even broader question here about whether we can justifiably react to anything with scorn and condemnation. Is canceling ever warranted? Is it right to condemn racism, homophobia, and misogyny? Or should we allow spokespeople for these prejudices a respected position in the free marketplace of ideas, where we can all sit around debating the legitimacy of gay marriage or the possible merits of a white ethno-state? Is the final solution a myth promulgated by the International Jew? Are yoga pants to blame for sexual violence? Wouldn't the taxpayer save a lot of money if there weren't so many disabled people? Who knows? These are open questions. Let's sit down with people on both sides, on many sides, and have calm, civil conversations about it for the rest of our goddamn lives.
And here, typically for a woke person, ContraPoints shows how much her thinking isn't liberal and isn't compatible with living in a democratic society. First of all, she displays the old progressive belief that there is such a thing as a dustbin of history, where ideas are thrown in the process of progress and never come back. Well, unfortunately, ideas are like comic book characters. They always come back, even the worst of them. They never die, they are just defeated for a while. The reason why racism and homophobia are relatively dormant right now is that all of their arguments have been sufficiently debunked. But that doesn't mean that in the future, due to changes in society or in science, they won't be able to find ways to rebrand themselves and return. Therefore, we should allow all of the bigots to continue speaking, so we can detect the new ways they invent to peddle their stuff, and debunk them before they grow. Secondly, Natalie doesn't seem to understand what public debate means. She seems to think that it means the minority gets its rights only after the debate has been settled. No, you gradually gain your rights in the process of the debate, which is causing ideas and values to change. Also, it doesn't mean that we stop condemning bigoted views, and it doesn't mean that we sit around and have polite conversations with bigots. It means that we allow them to speak, listen to what they have to say, and debunk it. And it's not something we have to waste our lives on. For every form of bigotry, there are experts who dedicate their time to fight it, and they create websites. I, personally, fight online anti-Semitism, but I'm not an expert on the Holocaust. So if I encounter a claim by a Holocaust denier, I go online to find the refutation. This is why it is so important to allow Holocaust deniers to speak freely, so that the experts become aware of any new argument they invent, and publicly debunk it. If the deniers are relegated to the dark web, their ideas are allowed to fester freely. Finally, the biggest problem with Natalie's rant is that she ignores the fundamental difference between the trans issue and those other issues. When it comes to trans rights, we don't have sufficient answers. Not yet. There are very serious philosophical problems that come from saying that trans women are women, and there are even more problematic social consequences that come from it. We did not yet figure out how to solve these problems in a way that ensures trans rights on one hand and preserves women's rights on the other. And ContraPoints knows this. Her attempt to equate the trans issue with those other minority groups is a cynical attempt to silence those who oppose her. In a particularly astute moment on Megan Phelps' podcast, journalist Michelle Goldberg highlights this difference.
And part of the difficulty is that there are indeed certain issues which we have sort of decided somewhat collectively with some sort of consensus are beyond the realm of debate. And I think that part of what is so difficult about this issue is that there's certain people who think that this kind of consensus can be imposed maybe as opposed to evolve organically. And so they're sort of desperately trying to shore it up in the hopes, I think, that if they can, they will enjoy the same sort of assumed protection as other groups whose rights we've decided are not up for public conversation. I think the problem is that we don't actually have a consensus about what gender means or what makes someone a boy or girl or a woman or a man. And so you still have to talk these things out and have these conversations.
Hit the nail right on the head. Woke activists seem to have a particular view of history. They think it is a battle between those who believe in human rights and those who don't, and that victory is achieved when those who don't are defeated, i.e., cancelled. That's not how it goes. Almost everyone in Western societies believe in human rights. When they object to giving certain rights to a certain group, it's because they believe it will come at the expense of the rights of others. You have to resolve the philosophical issues and show that you can grant those rights to that group in a way that doesn't harm others. And how do you do that? Through dialogue, in which everyone, especially the biggest opposers, should be allowed to participate and raise their objections so we can sort it all out. Once we do, the values of liberal society take over and ensure that everyone gets their rights, and the bigots are defeated. But ContraPoints doesn't think so. Here's how she reacted to this segment.
So Michelle correctly observes that the reason trans people are often reluctant to debate our rights is that we want the same assumed protections as other groups whose rights liberals have decided are not up for debate. But then, Michelle suggests that trans people have to debate our rights because there isn't a mainstream consensus that we deserve rights. I am really curious to know how Michelle Goldberg thinks that past liberation movements have succeeded. Like, does she think that women's suffrage just evolved organically? Did suffragettes just have calm, civil conversations about whether women are intellectually capable of voting until all the misogynists were rationally persuaded?
I don't know if Natalie is playing dumb here, or if she's really that detached from how non-woke people think and talk. When Goldberg talks about consensus, she doesn't mean that everyone agrees, but that there's a widespread agreement in society, such that makes the small number of detractors irrelevant. And when we say that rights evolve organically, we don't mean that it happens without struggle. What we mean by organically is that it evolves bottom-up, through a social struggle, and not imposed from above. You want to know how women got the right to vote, Natalie? Through a long struggle that lasted more than a century, in which they eventually persuaded enough people to support it.
No, they stood up and demanded their right to vote, sometimes violently, especially in the UK. Like, people forget this, maybe because they were called suffragettes, which is kind of a cutesy name, but the suffragettes, they murdered people. They were suffragette terrorists.
Yes, but the suffragettes didn't do anything for women's suffrage. They appeared only at the tail end of the struggle, when it was practically won, and their violent actions actually set the cause back.
And my point is not to advocate terrorism or to excuse the terrorism of past movements. I think these kinds of tactics have tended to turn people against the movement. I don't think it's effective, but let's not pretend that past movements have never made demands before everyone was ready. Because there never has been, and there never will be a time when everyone is ready. I mean, Mary Wollstonecraft published The Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, and misogyny, in case you hadn't noticed, remains rampant. So there never has been a consensus about women's rights, and there probably never will be.
Exactly. A vindication of the rights of women was written during the French Revolution, a revolution that aimed at achieving equality, and which set the stage for the modern age, which tried to achieve this ideal through gradual progress. But women were not initially included in this dream of equality, because the thinking of the time regarded their nature as different from the nature of man, a nature that is not capable of living as a sovereign individual. Throughout the 19th century, female authors fought to change this perception, and achieved their goal by the end of the century. In the process, around halfway through the century, the demand for women's suffrage became a thing. Then, in the beginning of the 20th century, the suffragettes appeared, did a lot of damage to the cause, but it was already strong enough to prevail despite their actions. So why do the suffragettes get the credit? Simple, because the history of feminism is written by the radical feminists, who twist it to make it seem like they were the ones to thank for their achievements. And note that Natalie's words indicate that she actually knows all this, and yet her video still advocates for the radical, violent way. She doesn't condone physical violence, but she is all for that other form of violence, cancel culture.
I'm just saying that there's this tendency to sanitize history and to imagine that progress was smooth and bloodless, that consensus evolved organically, when it just didn't.
Yes, it did. You simply misrepresent what we mean by the words consensus and organically. Contra does this because she wants to justify her claim that political violence is the way to get things done. Throughout the video, she brings up human rights groups that enacted violence in the past to legitimize her position. The one thing that all her examples have in common is that, just like the suffragettes, all of their violent actions only harmed the cause they were fighting for. But Natalie neglects to mention that. Again, the violence she advocates for is not physical violence, but cancel culture. But it is still disgusting to watch. Even more sad is Natalie's utter failure to see that what drives J.K. Rowling is the same woke ideology that informs her own worldview. Instead, in order to explain Rowling's positions, she proceeds to psychoanalyze her, claiming that she is merely displacing her rage towards men and puts it on trans women.
And this displacement of rage is just transparently what's going on with J.K. Rowling.
This ugly left-wing trope originates in the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurters, dismayed by the fact that working-class people do not act the way Marxists say they should act, used psychoanalysis to explain why those stupid peasants won't do what's good for them, why they refuse to be pawns in the Marxist revolutionary game. Feminists have used the same logic to explain why there are right-wing women. Now, ContraPoints uses it to explain the actions of Rowling on other turfs, and claim that their bigotry stems from a right-wing position, and not from wokeness.
Now, it's true that trans-exclusionary radical feminism began as an offshoot of far-left lesbian separatism, with academic feminist Janice Raymond writing in 1979 that transsexualism should be morally mandated out of existence. But the gender-critical movement was always destined to become a right-wing movement, because it has the structure of a right-wing movement, taking women's fear and rage toward familiar men and displacing it onto an unfamiliar outsider.
And so, instead of taking this moment for reflection and self-criticism, asking how wokeness has led us to this, Natalie only doubles down on her wokeness, wholly adopting the woke modus operandi of trying to cancel all those who oppose them. Nauseating, pathetic, and a new low for ContraPoints. Both J.K. Rowling and ContraPoints, then, display the sad outcomes of your brain on woke. Two highly intelligent, highly talented, and highly conscientious women who want to use their power to do good, but are instead driven to extremes of bigoted thinking because of the groundless ideology they uncritically adhere to. The challenge for so-called centrists is to offer something better, and this is what Sitch and Adam try to do. In the stream they did, reacting to Contra's video, they do a pretty good job at calling her out for all the things we mentioned here, And they also do a decent job roasting J.K. Rowling for her wokeness.
Yeah, but I mean, I just from a political perspective, that's just she's playing the part, man.
Yeah,
How's
no,
she
I
not
mean-
playing? This is like victimhood culture 101.
Yeah.
She's like,
It could-
listen, I am the victim here. Look, she's literally the witch being burned at the witch
Yes,
trials.
of course.
She's like, you want to victimhood culture me, bitch? I'll show you how it's done. I'm J.K. fucking Rowling.
If you're not familiar with Sitch and Adam, PSA Sitch is the more intellectual one, whereas Adam Friended is the common sense, common man comedian. Together, they form a dynamic duo of comedy and critical thinking, combined with non-stop bickering, and are fun to watch. They do call out J.K. Rowling for being woke in other ways, but where they fail, I'm afraid, is in realizing that her wokeness also makes her a bigot on the trans issue. They fall for her pseudo-liberal speech and claim that on this issue she is being reasonable, expressing the voice of the sane majority. And this failure matters because it reflects their failure to fully understand the ideologies they are criticizing, which leads to them not being able to provide a centrist alternative. Let's see if we can do better. Let's begin by defining, at long last, what wokeness is. Here is how Sitch defines it, while explaining how it is different from left-wing movements of the past.
Wokeism is the idea that liberal solutions cannot fix society, and we must adopt illiberal solutions like some form of cultural Marxism to fix our society and to all
Right.
get along. And in the gay rights movement in the 1970s, gay people were asking for equal rights under liberal society, and
Right.
that was it.
Yeah.
All that was being asked for, right? So that is people asking that they be allowed to participate in society and be granted the liberal rights that we all share.
Right.
It's
But they weren't
completely
asking.
different.
And here is how Adam defines it.
You brought up your definition of woke. I understand that definition, but it's hard to conceptualize. It's just so much easier to think of victimhood culture, oppression Olympics. These words I think that's the root of the woke.
Yeah, okay, they are both right. That's part of it. But they are describing the symptoms, not the disease itself. What I am about to present is the most comprehensive breakdown of wokeness that I have ever performed on video, and I hope it will all be made clear by the end. So, brace yourselves, and let me be your guide into intellectual hell. Adam and Sitch correctly argue that wokeness is not liberal. What we should add is that it is not progressive either. It is something else. To understand what, we shall begin by distinguishing between two types of leftist thinking, what I call evolutionary left and creationist left. Evolutionary left believes that humans evolved in a natural process. The resulting human nature is very diverse. Every individual is different, but certain groups are also typified by traits that usually go together, so we can categorize them and find statistical differences between these groups. It also believes that human civilization evolved in a similarly messy process, but also in a way that shows progress towards a human society that provides a better life for its members. The liberal leftist believes that liberal democracy is the best possible society and is the culmination of this evolutionary process, but also that injustices were created during this messy evolution of civilization and are still being created as society continues to change and evolve, so we should work to correct them. In short, that society can never be perfect and always needs maintenance. We'll shortly see an example that will make it clearer. The progressives are another type of evolutionary leftists. They generally believe that we should not just react to injustices that we find, but that we should devise systems that would make society more just to begin with, and thus take a more active part in this evolutionary process. Also, since this belief in progress was born in the late 18th century, before Darwin, some progressives believe that the nature of man is good, compatible with life in a utopian society, and therefore we should progress beyond liberal democracy and create a utopian state. The realization that humans are just naked apes should have led to the realization that human nature cannot be fully fixed, and utopia is therefore impossible, but this idea doggedly kept going. It finally collapsed after the 1960s, as utopian progressives could no longer justify their views. This is when creationist leftism offered a new home for radicals. Creationist leftism doesn't believe human nature is messy and animalistic. It regards humans as being good by nature, but also as very malleable, prone to have their behavior totally constructed and shaped by society. And it doesn't regard human civilization as having evolved, but as the result of a single act of creation, sometimes in the ancient past, that divided humanity into two classes, one oppressor and one oppressed. The dominant class then created language and concepts designed to maintain its dominance, and this language defines us, shapes us, and controls our thinking to this day. Which means that there is no progress. Any seeming progress is only on the surface, while the initial structure remains intact, meaning that society remains as oppressive as it was. Western liberal society, then, is merely the culmination of this civilization, which means that it is the highest form of oppression and must be brought down in order to bring true justice. If we take creationist feminism as an example, it believes that thousands of years ago, the patriarchy was formed. The patriarchy makes males the ruling class and females the oppressed class, and to maintain itself, it created the concept of gender. That is, that man, the human male, is characterized by more than just a biology, but has a whole set of behavioral attributes, and the same goes for the woman. These gender attributes, claim the creationist feminists, actually have nothing to do with male and female nature, but were entirely constructed by the patriarchy, designed to ensure the dominance of men. And we are still living with the same gender concepts to this day, ensuring that women remain oppressed. The only way to liberate women, and men, because they cannot be truly happy while women are oppressed, is to destroy the society we have today, smash the patriarchy, so that a society based on our true nature can emerge. The underlying belief is that human nature is good, so the society will be utopian. We find the same line of thinking when it comes to race. The creationist racialists believe that white people invented the concept of race to ensure their dominance. The white race is the one that all the positive traits are attributed to, while other races have been marked with inferior qualities. Whiteness, the name of this oppressive structure, was thus imposed on all of us, and dominates the way we think. Western liberal society is the culmination of whiteness, and therefore must be destroyed to bring the utopia. We heard Sitch claim that the battle for gay rights in the 70s was a liberal battle, merely asking to allow gays to have equal rights in a liberal society. That's not entirely true. It also had a creationist side that believed that heteronormativity, basically bourgeois family values, is the structure that must be destroyed to bring utopia. This ideology was amplified by right-wingers, who tarred all gay activists with it, and it brought an anti-gay backlash in the 80s. It was then that liberal gays took over the fight, in the 90s, and got equal rights, including the right for same-sex marriage. And once gays started to get married, it completely destroyed the creationist gay movement, because it meant that gay people accepted heteronormativity, became part of it. This is why you rarely see them in the current culture wars. That gay cake thing is all they had. This all sounds reminiscent of neo-Marxism, and there is influence. We heard Sitch calling it cultural Marxism. Except it isn't. It's wrong to refer to it as Marxism. Marxism is evolutionary leftism. It believes in progress. It wants to overthrow liberal society, yes, but it also believes that this society is better than what came before, and that it was the thing that created, within it, the forces needed to take us to the next and final stage, the stage of communist utopia. Thus, the Marxists can find things within our world that they regard as positive. The creationist leftist, on the other hand, is totally alienated to our world. Everything in it is felt as a lie designed to oppress them. They don't trust their own instincts and preferences because they believe that they, too, were instilled in them by the oppressive structure. They cannot pursue their individual happiness because they see it as affirming the ruling order. They cannot partake in any form of fun, but merely criticize it and tell us why it's problematic that we enjoy it. The only hope left for them is that one day, somehow, the structure will fall and our true nature will be liberated. But they have no idea what our true nature is, because it is completely covered up and twisted by the language of the oppressor. Actually, there is one thing in their world that they do perceive as real, one thing that they can hold on to, and that is their victimhood. Because victimhood is the only connection they supposedly have to their true nature. The fact that I feel miserable in this world, they believe, can be explained only as my true nature calling from within, begging to be liberated. This is the cause of what Adam and Sitch call victimhood culture. The creationist leftist defines themselves by their victimhood, because that's the only truth they have. Their personal experience is that certain things in this world make them feel bad, so it must be because their true nature is telling them that these are the instruments of oppression, which we must overthrow. Of course, none of this makes any sense, because our personal experience is also largely shaped by the language and culture we grow into, the false consciousness that was imposed on us. So how do they know that their experiences of victimhood aren't also constructed? But don't look for logic in creationism. The thing that really depresses the creationist lefty is the realization that they can never change society, because the oppressive structure shapes us from the cradle. By the time you become politically aware, you've already been instilled with the language of the oppressor. The only way to change things, then, is to go for the children.
We live in a country where men and women are meant to be equal. Same pay, same careers, same opportunities. But children as young as 7 think that boys and girls are fundamentally different.
I think boys are cleverer than girls. Men are better at, being in charge. I would describe a girl as being pretty.
And that these differences will define the lives they live as adults.
If the woman has a child, the men have to go to work and earn some money. Men are more successful because they could have more harder jobs.
I don't believe that biology alone can explain these differences. I think the answer lies in the society we live in.
This is a video from 2017, when creationist feminism was at the peak of its power, and feminists were emboldened to openly show us what their true intentions are.
I'm Dr. Javed Abdulmunem. What if they called you all Sweet Pea? I'm going to find out if by turning a class of 7-year-old primary school children
What are we doing?
gender neutral, you've got to start going to the same toilet. I can change the way they think about themselves.
Everyone can have a chance to do what they like.
And the way they think about their future.
I do not like reading, but I like reading that book.
And if I can do that, perhaps there's a chance of making their adult lives really equal.
So, we have a bunch of British schoolchildren being used as guinea pigs in a social experiment. Dr. Javed is a creationist feminist, and he is going to show us that the schools are shaping us according to gender stereotypes that are not based in biology, but determined by the patriarchy.
Share what you've written. These children have lived their entire lives in a world that says it wants men and women to be treated the same.
Get things written down.
But is that how things really are?
Come on, Amber, give it a go, love. Maisie, what we're doing, love, is you just come in pretending we're gladiators, so we're describing what we're seeing.
Stephanie used love for the girls and hate for the boys.
Right? Yes, love.
It seems to me that if we treat boys and girls differently, that's how they will see themselves.
Nancy, finger spaces, of course, my love. We always need finger spaces.
But if we treat them the same, maybe we can transform their views and alter what the future might hold for them.
Now, if your ear isn't sensitive enough to detect wokeness, this might all sound very reasonable and liberal. He makes a good point. Women today are expected to go out and compete in the marketplace, yet little girls are not being fully prepared for it. Instead of playing with things like Lego, which would develop the required skills, they still play with dolls. He also interviews scientists who point out how much nurture shapes the mind of children, to emphasize how crucial this is. This is what I talked about earlier when I discussed evolutionary leftism. Society has changed, and women now work. But the way girls are being raised was not adjusted to this change, does not properly prepare them for competing in the world of work, and this creates an injustice. As a lefty, then, you should work to fix this injustice, to evolve girls' toys to fit today's world. You should do the same for boys, too. See where they are not being optimally prepared for today's world. However, this is not what Dr. Javid is advocating for. Let's listen again.
It seems to me that if we treat boys and girls differently, that's how they will see themselves.
Nancy, finger spaces, of course, my love. We always need finger spaces.
But if we treat them the same, maybe we can transform their views and alter what the future might hold for them.
He doesn't want us to find the best way to treat girls and the best way to treat boys in order to prepare them for today's world. He wants us to treat them the same. And he believes that if we do that, they will also grow up the same. This does not follow from the science that he presented. It's not science, it's ideology. Creationist ideology, taken on blind faith. And he manages to convince the teachers and the parents to let him do it, because they are not savvy enough to tell the difference between this and the evolutionary approach. Now you might say, hang on, didn't you tell us that creationist feminism sees men and women as different? How is it creationist feminism to say that they are the same? Yes, creationist feminists believe that human males and females are different. They are different on the biological sex level. But remember, the gender differences do not come from biology, but are constructed by the patriarchy. In every way that the patriarchy tells us that the two genders are different, they are actually the same, and this is what Javid is trying to show. If he succeeds, he will basically liberate those kids' minds from gender, and if we do that for everyone, believe the feminists, the patriarchy will be brought down, and our true nature will be allowed to manifest itself. They can't tell us what that nature is, but they do know one thing. When male nature was allowed to rule, it created inequality and injustice. So the female nature, which feels victimized by this, must be the one that is about equality and justice. In the utopian state that will emerge after the fall of the patriarchy, then, we will have true equality. In other words, a society in which women reign supreme. Where does this pedagogical logic lead to? Observe.
These children have such different ideas when it comes to strength, and there really is no reason for it. I want them to understand just how similar they are in terms of physical strength, even if that forces the boys to challenge the belief that they will always come out as the strongest. So, I've built a little surprise for them on their playing fields. I want you all to line yourselves up from strongest to weakest. Go. Knowing that these children are more or less equal when it comes to their biology, this isn't really about strength. Right, thank you very much for doing that. Now come back together. I believe it's about the children's self-confidence and levels of self-esteem. So, I'm going to ask each one of you to tell Mr. Andre and I what you think you're actually going to score. Ronnie, what do you think you'll score?
10.
10! Our test showed that the girls massively underestimated what they thought they could achieve.
Lexi, have you had a go? Come on, Lexi.
Lexi estimated that she would score just 5 out of 10.
You can do it, Lexi. Lexi, well done, Lexi.
As I was watching this, I was thinking, what the hell are you doing? You are getting girls used to the thought that they are as physically strong as boys. In a few years they're all going to hit puberty, and then they will suddenly be a lot weaker than them. Losing a power that you once possessed is a lot more traumatic than not having it to begin with. We should be preparing those girls for the idea that they are the weaker sex, not giving them delusions of power. But he has this idea that if we abolish gender, it will somehow liberate humanity. This is not a scientist. This is a zealot. This is someone who wants to reprogram humankind based on nothing but blind faith. Blind faith that he's got it right, and this gives him the right to groom our children. This is what leftist creationism leads to. The creationist feminist moment is thankfully over, but now we are dealing with creationist trans, an equally extremist ideology that believes cisnormativity should be destroyed. Earlier, we heard ContraPoints claim that no one wants to push kids into transitioning, and I expressed my doubts in the veracity of her claim. The reason I am skeptical is that after seeing Dr. Javid in action, and other feminists, I can very easily believe that now it is the creationist trans who are going for the children. Maybe not medically, but by teaching them that the sex binary isn't real. According to Republicans, at least, this is what's going on right now.
The left is attacking our children, pushing sex talk, transgender extremism, and noxious politics in our schools. We should reject this demonic assault on the innocence of our children and stand fast against leftist efforts to mutilate their bodies and minds.
Stop confusing our babies with your groomer gender ideologue.
The right wing have really lost their minds over this, and they are portraying the situation as much worse than it is. But I have seen some teachers bragging on TikTok that they are pushing this stuff on children. And since I know how crucial it is for the woke to get to the children, I'm assuming that there is some truth to the Republican accusations. Where the conservatives get it wrong, however, is that they regard this grooming as stemming from some sort of sexual fetish, when in fact it comes from something a lot more dangerous, from these teachers' belief that they are bringing utopia by liberating our children's minds from the oppressive cisnormativity. This is creationist leftism, then, and it has been around, in this form, since the late 1960s. But this is not yet wokeness. To get to wokeness, we need to mention a couple more developments that began in the academy in the 1990s and had their watershed moment in the middle of the last decade. First of all, the creationists started using postmodernist techniques of manipulating language in their attempt to undermine liberal language. If we take feminism as an example again, they used it to attack the concept of gender. Professors showed their students that they cannot provide a clear definition for the terms man and woman, and told them this proves that these concepts aren't real, but a construct. And the students, like most people, were ill-equipped to resist this sophistry.
Yeah, it is difficult to define, these categories and these things simply. That's what I've always said. I mean, you could do the same thing for what is a door? What is a chair? Have like this fucking hour-long conversation on trying to come up with a definition of a door or chair that encompasses every possible permutation of doors and chairs, but doesn't include things that are similar to doors and chairs. And it's because that's not the way that human categories work whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sitch gets it, but let's nail it down. Traditionally, it was believed that every word can be clearly defined. Aristotle, for instance, defined the word human as a rational animal. Humans have other attributes, of course, but these are the two attributes that are essential to the category human, according to Aristotle. This means that every member of the category human is both rational and animal, and also that every being that possesses both of these attributes is human. This approach to language is called essentialism. But in the 20th century, philosophers came to the conclusion that language doesn't work like that. You cannot find a definition that will encompass all the members of a category, and exclude all non-members, because reality is too messy and diverse to be so neatly categorized. Every word, therefore, has multiple meanings, and the meaning of it in each instance is determined by the context. Let's take the word fruit as an example. Fruit is what we call the part of the plant that contains seeds, and also what we call food that grows on trees. These two attributes usually go together, but not always. So, if we use the word in the first sense, it includes watermelons. If we use it in the second sense, it does not include watermelons. The word does have a clear meaning in each of those two cases, but the meaning is derived from the context, which lets us understand which meaning we are using. So the fact that we cannot provide a single, all-encompassing dictionary definition of the word fruit doesn't mean that we can't use it in a sentence in a way that is clearly understood. Unfortunately, because most people still think along traditional, essentialist lines, they expect words to have clear definitions that apply in every instance, and this allows those creationist professors to manipulate their students and get them to believe that words like man and woman are meaningless. Affecting the minds of some young students, however, wasn't going to change things. What made the difference was social media. This gave the creationists the power to, as they see it, wake us all up to the oppressive system we are trapped in, make us all woke. It gave them the power to group together and try to do to all of us what Dr. Jabi tried to do to these children, force us to adopt their language, and thus their logic. This is what cancel culture is about. The woke are trying to eliminate and terrorize anyone who dares to use the wrong language, even if it's just one word, so that their language takes over. But they also believe that their language is not completely liberated yet from the concepts of oppression, so they constantly try to purify it, and anyone who isn't woke to the changes and uses the concepts of yesterday runs the risk of being cancelled. This is one development. The other is intersectionality. Intersectionality was invented in the early 90s by black feminists who noticed that there were several creationist factions on the left and suggested that they combine forces to fight together against the oppressive system, fight against what feminist bell hooks called the imperialist white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. Sounds very noble, a camaraderie of the oppressed, but note what is actually happening here. The different factions are not put on the same level. In fact, they are all being erased, and the oppressive structure, as they define it, is reduced to being a mere adjective of the patriarchy. What intersectional feminism is actually saying to the other factions is, you are fighting the wrong enemy. It is the gender roles constructed by the patriarchy that have made men racist, imperialist, and capitalist. Forget about fighting those derivatives. Help us abolish gender, smash the patriarchy, and this will fix men, and thus bring down imperialism, white supremacy, and capitalism. It was, in short, a power play by the feminists to take over the radical left and turn all of its energy towards fighting the imaginary patriarchy. If we go back 10 years, it looked like this takeover was successful. Feminism dominated radical leftist talk, and it was all about bringing down the patriarchy. Alas, once they introduced intersectionality, these feminists allowed not one but two Trojan horses into their camp. The other factions didn't give in so easily. Some creationist racialists claim that actually, the system we are fighting is the imperialist, patriarchal, capitalist whiteness, so we should adopt their language. How do we determine who is right? Well, here is where the all-important Oppression Olympics come into play. That thing that was so confounding to the rest of us at the time.
It's the special snowflake oppression Olympics. Everyone is in this big race to be the most progressive and the most open-minded and the most oppressed. It is the strangest thing I have ever seen.
It's not that strange when you understand what's at stake. Remember, your victimhood is the thing that points you to the truth about human nature. This means that the one who is the most victimized is the one who is closest to the truth, the one we should all listen and believe to. And so, the woke became embroiled in the question of which one of them is the most oppressed, who is the one before we should all bow down and capitulate, and accept their language and concepts. The battle between the racialists and the feminists was decided after the 2016 US elections, when it turned out that most white women voted for Trump. This allowed the racialists to talk about white feminism, which is nothing but an extension of whiteness. Anyone who dared to hold on to the idea that patriarchy is the ruling system and argue from that perspective was accused of white feminism and labeled a Karen by the creationist racialists. The Trojan horse, which may have been put there deliberately by Bell Hooks and her black cohorts, did its work. But this was the least of the feminist problems, because the other Trojan horse was even worse. Once the idea of intersectionality was created, it drew in young feminists who took it seriously, and they, foolishly, thought that other creationist factions should also be brought in. And so, the patriarchy now became the imperialist, white supremacist, heteronormative, cisnormative capitalist patriarchy. Bell Hooks didn't bring the creationist LGBT movements into intersectionality, and she knew why. Because the logic of creationist trans is diametrically opposed to creationist feminism, and contains the seeds of its total destruction. Here's how. As we discussed, creationist feminism believes that sex is real. That is, that human males and females are different. There is a binary. But the gender binary, that is allegedly the result of this sex binary, is totally bogus. The two genders are not the natural expression of the two sexes, but an unnatural and phony construct of the patriarchy. We should therefore abolish gender, liberate our true nature, and then reconstruct gender based on our true biological nature. The creationist trans believe the exact opposite. They believe that gender is real. That is, that we are born with a gender identity, and this identity does not stem from our biological sex. Sex, they claim, using the same postmodernist sophistry the feminists use, cannot be defined, and therefore cannot be the cause of gender. We should therefore abolish the belief in the sex binary, and let everyone self-identify their gender. Creationist feminism and creationist transgenderism, then, contradict each other, and cannot possibly coexist. This is why the former insists that trans women are actually men. They cannot even accept that they are trans women, because then they'd have to accept that they are an oppressed minority, a minority that wins the oppression Olympics against women, and is therefore right. They must define them as men, and thus as oppressors that are in the wrong. It didn't work, though. The creationist trans won this fight, and pushed through the idea that the oppressive system is cisnormativity, and all other forms of oppression are its adjectives. Except they don't call it cisnormativity. They don't even call it system, which would have been a pretty good name. They have another name for it, as we shall find out later. A feminist who refuses to capitulate is branded as a TERF, a term that, much like Karen, lost its original meaning and is now used as a slur for anyone who dares to still be a feminist. Make no mistake, feminism is currently dead in woke circles. Those who still call themselves feminists are allowed to do so only if they pledge allegiance to either the woke racialists or the woke trans, and agree that we should bring down either whiteness or cisnormativity if we want to liberate women. Anyone who still believes it's actually the patriarchy we should be fighting is cancelled. The downfall of creationist feminism was so complete, and the feminists so terrorized and cowered, that only a feminist who is too big to be cancelled could do anything about it. This is where J.K. Rowling came in.
So when I first became interested and then deeply troubled by what I saw as a cultural movement that was illiberal in its methods and was very questionable in its ideas, I absolutely knew that if I spoke out, many people who had loved my books would be deeply unhappy with me. I knew that. I knew because I knew that I could see that they believed they were living the values that I had espoused in those books. I could tell that they believed they were fighting for underdogs and difference and fairness. And I thought it would be easier not to. You know that this could be really bad. And honestly, it has been bad. Personally, it has not been fun. And I have been scared at times for my own safety, and overwhelmingly for my family's safety. Time will tell whether I've got this wrong. I can only say that I've thought about it deeply and hard and long, and I've listened, I promise, to the other side. And I believe absolutely that there is something dangerous about this movement, and it must be challenged.
On the 19th of December, 2019, J.K. Rowling finally jumped into the public conversation around sex and gender. By that point, she'd spent years following the debate and had become increasingly concerned about what she saw as a vocal group of trans rights advocates unfairly targeting feminists who disagreed with them. So she weighed in with a tweet. And Rowling's post seemed to surprise and encourage several of the feminists who'd been targeted by campaigns to get them removed from their jobs and by protests. Women like Kathleen Stock.
I was delighted to see, absolutely delighted, because at the time it felt very like there was just a bunch of relatively insignificant women, including myself, howling into the void about it, to be honest, and getting no traction in the media, getting no traction politically, everyone treating us as if we were just total deplorables, which we were not.
To be clear, I commend Rowling for standing up, and I condemn any attempt to silence people over this issue. Furthermore, even though I think the TERF's position towards transgenders is bigoted, I will not judge them for it, because we have not reached a point where the questions around this issue have been sufficiently answered, so I cannot judge anyone for being confused into holding what I consider bigoted positions. This is an issue on which everyone should be encouraged to speak, until we resolve all the philosophical problems. My problem with centrists, however, is that many of them seem to think Rowling's position is a reasonable, liberal position, which they should support. It isn't.
You have said that you respect trans people. You said that you would march with them, that you think the transition is right for some people. But you also say that there's a real difference between biological women and trans women, and a meaningful distinction between the two in their experiences. And I think some of your critics point to that and say, you're essentially making trans women second-class women. You know, like you're almost women, that despite all of their efforts to live in the world as women, as what feels right and authentic to them, you are essentially saying, I'll treat you as a woman. You are an honorary woman. But this distinction that you are emphasizing, the biological distinction that you see as being so important, it can feel hurtful to them. Like they are, you know, almost a thing, but not quite. Like something is being held back. Can you understand the pain that that could cause?
Yes, is the short answer. Yes, I can understand that hurt. The thing is, women are the only group, to my knowledge, that are being asked to embrace members of their oppressor class, unquestioningly, with no caveat.
There we have it. Rowling perceives the relationship between the sexes in terms of a class war. Gender is the instrument by which the male class oppresses the female class. To admit any male into the oppressed class, even a small number, would be to admit that it's not a battle of sexes, but a battle of genders. And this brings down the entire ideology. This is why Rowling cannot do it. She may think that she is merely fighting for women's rights, and that she is being as tolerant as possible towards trans women, but she isn't. There are ways to be more tolerant towards them, to accept them as women, while still opposing the idea that they should be allowed into all women's spaces. But because Rowling sees everything through the lens of class warfare between the sexes, she isn't capable of seeing it.
It's very much a feature of the culture in which I grew up, that women, by virtue of their biology, are subjected to specific harms, specific pressures, and require certain protections. And that is inextricably linked with our biology, and we cannot fight for our rights without naming and accurately describing what makes us different from men.
Rowling says that this was all foundational to her understanding of why feminism was necessary. Because for generations, the reality of male violence and predation was a fact that had been ignored, downplayed, and even excused, until feminists fought for it to be recognized and remedied in as many ways as possible.
My feminism must remain grounded in the sex class and the oppressions my sex class suffer. That's the basis for our oppression. That's my understanding of why certain things have happened to me.
And here is where we find that she isn't just a radical feminist, but a creationist feminist. As a creationist, the only way for her to define a woman is through her victimhood. And because trans women did not live through this victimhood, she denies that they can possibly belong to the category of women. Again, this isn't science, this is blind faith. Blind faith that we are living in a patriarchy, and accepting trans women would be to affirm the patriarchal order. This is Rowling's bigotry, and this is what Sitch and Adam failed to detect.
So wait. She said she called TERFs crypto-reactionary disguised as feminists.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Jake, that's a bold claim and a bullshit
giant claim.
Because I don't know about other people, but J.K. Rowling was legitimately, and still is, a woke feminist.
Very much
so. She's just pretending to be a feminist?
She's even, dare I say, a liberal.
Yes. I mean, I would say she's not even liberal. I think J.K. is very lefty.
Yeah, but she's constantly harping about the illiberalness of, I mean, that's got to turn you on.
Yes,
right?
But I feel like she's only doing it. I feel like she's only doing it because it's against her. Like, if the trans issue disappeared, she'd be like, oh my God, there's a wage gap. Women only make 75 cents for every dollar of the men. We need to tear shit up until this is fixed.
So you're saying she would be illiberal?
Of course. I don't trust any consistency in J.K.
We need to fire half the men.
Yes.
And give their jobs to women.
Yep.
This isn't illiberal?
That's how it's so funny, people forget that's literally how she was before the trans issue came about. She was like super hyper woke. And then when the trans issue started dominating everything, then all of a sudden, oh, she's fucking based. She's not woke anymore. I'm like, okay. Like, all these TERFs are not your friends.
Of course
all these TERFs are insane woke feminists. They're just anti-woke on this trans question because it's basically like,
I'm so glad you said this.
It's kind of like, oh, the wokeness hurts me now. I'm against it in this one very narrow, specific area where wokeness finally hurts me.
Right.
That's like, no, bitch, this is your fault. Okay, this is exactly what you advocated for.
It's so true. Like, as soon as all this is settled, it's going to be right back to the patriarchy.
Yes. It's like, you open the door with this
gap.
Exactly. You open the door. All the feminists opened the door for this, but they literally laid the philosophical grounding for this by making the non-scientific arguments about blank slateism,
genders of performance, all this bullshit,
and that everything is some kind of oppressive patriarchy.
Right. Now you want to go back to the science.
Yeah, right. Yeah, now all of a sudden science matters. Like, no one gives a shit about science when it's against them, but suddenly when it's on my side, I'm the most scientific person in the world. Pass me the fucking test tubes in the lab coat. I love science now.
You motherfuckers are quoting Judith Butler right and left. Now look where it got you.
Yeah, exactly.
These two examples typify the tone that they adopt throughout. They acknowledge that the creationist feminists are woke, and that their ideology and actions are what led to the rise of creationist trans. But they think that when these feminists, including Rowling, are arguing against trans creationism, they do so from a faux liberal position. They don't recognize that they are still being woke extremists. Furthermore, they seem to think that the reason why they don't do feminism at the moment is that they are preoccupied with the trans issue, and they don't realize it's because the trans won the Oppression Olympics and utterly cancelled woke feminism. They also predict that the feminists will win, and that then they will go back to their woke feminism. And they joke about it, as if it was funny. Yeah, really funny. They seem to have forgotten just how sinister this feminism was. The problem wasn't the talk about the wage gap. It was the talk about rape culture. By manipulating rape statistics, the woke feminists made it seem like women are not being believed, and on the basis of that, they legitimized the idea that women should be automatically believed if they make rape accusations. This gave them power to go after any man they wanted, and use it as a weapon. Intoxicated by this power, some feminists even started to talk out loud about a curfew for all men after dark. But then, at the moment of their triumph, the ground was suddenly taken from under their feet, as the new woke gospel became that trans women should be allowed into all women's spaces. Any suggestion that males are dangerous to women thus became taboo in woke discourse, and would get you cancelled. You cannot talk about rape culture anymore. This is a great service that the transgenders have done for all of us. So let's keep it this way, and not help woke feminism make a comeback. Then again, the woke trans activists are also extremists, and what they are advocating for is also dangerous. And here, too, Adam and Sitch fail to realize exactly what's going on.
I would advise trans people and our allies to keep in mind that J.K. Rowling is not the final boss of transphobia. She's not our devil. The devil is the Republican Party, the Conservative Party. The devil
hilarious.
is patriarchy. It's the right wing.
Patriarchy?
You like that?
The devil is patriarchy.
The devil is patriarchy.
Oh my god, she's totally jumped the shark. This is just ridiculous.
I know.
It's the Republican. No, it's not just the Republican Party, it's patriarchy. Oh, they're everywhere. Where are they? They're kidding me.
No, you guys are not paying attention. You're right that it's hilarious that after making a 2-hour video about bigoted behavior by women, Contra ends up blaming the patriarchy. But you're missing the point. What we are witnessing here is the annexation and colonization of feminist talk by the trans. I said before that they believe the oppressive system is not the patriarchy, as feminists claim, but cisnormativity. But I also said that they refer to it not as cisnormativity, but by another name, and that other name, as we see here, is patriarchy. The name patriarchy has been appropriated to mean something else than what the feminists mean, exploiting the fact that they, too, regard the current concept of gender as a fake construct. The woke trans pretend that they are talking about the same patriarchy, except that they smash it not by abolishing gender, but by abolishing sex. And they can get away with it, too, because most woke people aren't savvy enough to realize the trick that is being pulled on them. And Contra, here, is taking it a step further, and turning the feminist tactic on the woke feminists. Just like the latter claim that trans women are actually men, agents of the patriarchy, she now claims that the TERFs are actually just women who are being brainwashed by the patriarchy, to accept its logic. The goal here is total eradication of woke feminism, so that woke trans logic can prevail. So, what should centrists be doing in regards to this war of the woke?
And so there's like this complete meltdown about it. So I'm just sitting here like Ken Watanabe, like, let them fight.
No, we should not just let them fight. First of all, they are harming people. The rights of women are being trampled, and the rights of transgenders are being trampled. Secondly, if we let them fight, one of them might win, and we really don't want that. And besides, it's just so sad to watch them tearing each other apart like this. In the Witch Trials podcast, ContraPoints actually starts to cry when she talks about what Harry Potter meant to her. There is a better alternative. An alternative that protects the rights of both women and transgenders. An alternative that makes all this madness unnecessary. What, then, is the alternative I am offering? First of all, we assert that sex is real and that gender is real. By establishing that gender is real, we demolish woke feminism. By establishing that sex is real, we demolish woke transgenderism. Sex is real means that we acknowledge that, statistically, there's a group of biological attributes that are typically attached to one of the sexes. For instance, that males are generally bigger, stronger, have a deeper voice, etc. Gender is real means that we acknowledge that, statistically, there's a group of behavioral attributes that are typically attached to one of the sexes. For instance, that women are generally more emotional, have a motherly instinct, tend to be attracted to men, etc. It is true that many gender expressions are socially constructed, but there are some that come from nature, and that's enough to determine that gender is real. The idea that both sex and gender are real is supported by science, and the arguments against it, as we earlier discussed, are just postmodernist sophistry. For a more detailed explanation, watch this video. Secondly, we take a stand on the question, are trans women women? To understand why this is important, we first need to realize that both sides are using a Motte and Bailey argument.
Well, that's the irony here. The whole argument that trans women are women is a mop and bucket.
Totally.
Yes. Because the bucket here is, well, if we just redefine trans women to being woman, we automatically win the argument that trans women have to be allowed in all the spaces that cis women are allowed in: locker rooms, prisons, bathrooms, sports, blah, 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 and are suddenly granted all the same protection under the law that exists for sex discrimination lawsuits. Right. That's the whole thing is a mop and bucket. So it's so ironic for Contra to bring this up and not realize that's literally what her position and what her side is doing.
She's the one mop and bucketing.
Exactly. Trans women ask us to regard them as women. This is a mot, an argument easy to defend, because we naturally respond to ContraPoints as if she was a woman, and also because we know how important it is for humans to be recognized as what we self-identify as. But the woke trans then take an essentialist approach to language, to claim that if the definition of woman includes trans women, it means that it must include it in every possible instance. So if we deny it in one instance, it means that we deny it completely. This is how they try to get us to accept the Bailey, the idea that trans women should be regarded as women even when it comes to women's sports, women's bathrooms, women's prisons, etc. And the woke feminists cannot argue against it, because they also have an essentialist view on language. This is another reason why J.K. Rowling cannot bring herself to say that trans women are women, because in her world, this means that she automatically accepts them as women in every instance, and thus grants them access to all women's spaces. But we are not woke, and we don't have to have an essentialist view of language. We understand that words take their meaning from the context, and do not have the same meaning in another context. Just like the word bucket, in this conversation, took on the meaning of an argument that is hard to defend, and could then be used in this sense, because both Sitch and Adam, and their viewers, all understood what it means. But they would not be able to use it in this sense in conversation with other people, because it usually doesn't have that meaning. Once we understand this, and apply it to the trans issue, all the problems are magically solved. This gives us the ability to accept that trans women are women, and give them the recognition that is so important for their well-being. But also to say that in some instances when the word woman is used in the sense of human female, it does not include trans women. Like women's doctor, or women's sports. Also, we understand that we don't have to use objectifying terms like people who menstruate. If you write an article titled How to Pick Fruit So It Doesn't Fall on Your Head, we all understand that you are using the word fruit in the sense of food that grows on trees, and you don't have to actually spell it out, so we'll know that you don't mean watermelons. Similarly, we all understand that in this context, if the word women was used, it would stand for people who menstruate, and there was no need to spell it out. Is this too complicated for the regular Joe to understand? Perhaps, but change always is, until it becomes commonplace, and then it becomes second nature to everyone. If we start pushing it today, then one day people will listen, and they will get it. The first people I want to listen to this video are Adam and Sitch, so please help me inform them about it. And don't forget to tell them, Z-Class is the best class.